So I think most of you already know me. I'm Jared Zystro. I work for Organic Seed Alliance. Organic Seed Alliance, we're a nonprofit that tries to increase the quality, quantity, diversity of seed available for organic farmers and sustainable agriculture. And I'm going to be talking about our State of Organic Seed report. Essentially, what we did is we did this first back in 2011, and we're repeating it now in 2014, where we wanted to do a comprehensive assessment of where we're at with organic seed and where we need to go. So what we looked at is we looked at a lot of different components of the seed system. We talked to producers. We surveyed over 1,350 organic producers. We talked to certifiers and certifying agencies. We talked to seed companies. We talked to researchers who have been working on organic seed and breeding work, as well as looking at the funding from the USDA and other funders for public research into seeds and breeds work. And then we conducted listening sessions with a broader range of stakeholders at sustainable ag and organic conferences all around the country last year. So essentially what we have now is we had done this in 2009 and we did it now in 2013, so we have an idea of a snapshot in time of right now, but also some trends that we can see over the last 4 years. And I'm going to give you just a brief I'm just going to focus on some of the highlights of the producer survey and of our research into organic seed investments. On Friday morning, I'll be giving a longer talk with the same basic theme where we'll be able to go into more detail. So if you want to hear more, come to that. So the producer survey, as I said, we sent this out to certified organic growers throughout the country and received back surveys from over 1,350 producers representing almost all the states in the U.S. This survey was essentially captured 4 different parts. One was just looking at general farm demographics. How big were the farms? What crops were they growing? How long had they been certified organic? And then we looked at their usage of organic seed for their vegetable seed acreage, for their field crop seed acreage, for their forage crops, for their cover crops. And then looked at what some of the challenges were that they saw around organic seed, and then ultimately looking at their needs and moving forward in terms of organic seed and breeding. So just some highlights here, looking at vegetable crops in terms of the average acreage that a farmer was planting to organic seed on their farm. What we saw looking from 2009 to 2014 is we saw that there was an increase. Back in 2009, about 55% of your average respondents' acreage was being planted with organic seed, and in 2014 it was almost 70%, so it was a fair jump. That being said, vegetable crops had been and continue to be relatively lower percentage of acreage being planted to organic seed compared to field crops, where back in 2009 we had about 72%, and here in 2014 we had 77%. So in general, field crop producers had been using more organic seed and continued to use more organic seed than the vegetable crop producers. Forage crops we saw as really no change from 2009 to 2014, about 60% then and 58% now. So kind of intermediate to vegetables and field crops in terms of how much is being used, but no real change. So there's a lot on this chart, but what we did was we broke it down by acreage. So we said, this big picture we're seeing with the field crops and certainly with the vegetable seed crops, this increase in organic seed use. We're seeing farmers using, mostly organic seed. What happens when we start looking at that based on how many acres they're growing? And what you see is a trend, well, certainly most pronounced in vegetable crops, where the larger you get, the less organic seed you're using. So the largest vegetable seed producers, what we put in the bin of over 480 acres of organic vegetable seed production. They were using, you can see there's a big error bar there because we had relatively few people who responded to that, who were growing that much, but they were growing, even with that big error bar, they were growing less, using less organic seed than the smaller folks. So what we saw was a lot of times it was the smallest growers that were driving the high use of organic seed, and the largest growers were really using a lot less. With vegetable seed, you saw less of that happening with the other crop types. So why was that? Why are farmers not using organic seed? Some of the top reasons, number one, was just that they had a variety that they needed that was not available organically. And this was the case back in 2009 and in 2014. This is the number one reason for number of growers, especially field crop producers and the larger vegetable seed growers, insufficient quantities of seed available organically of the variety that they might be interested in. That might be theoretically available in the marketplace, but when they want to order the quantities they need to plant, they can't get that quantity. Lack of desirable traits, so things like specific disease resistances that might not be available in any conventional variety or any organically produced varieties, was another large concern. In particular for field crop producers, just based on the way that we had phrased it, the question, there are many field crop producers that weren't necessarily buying organic seed, but were just saving their own. And price was a big factor, though the official standards say that price shouldn't be a determining factor in whether you're using organic or conventional seed. It was, when we had this anonymous survey, well over a third of people said this is a significant factor for us in using conventional seed versus organic seed. And so when we looked at it then by acreage, what we noticed was that there, in general, this tended to similar trend across acreage, but when we got to the largest growers of vegetable crops in particular, we saw two things. One was that price became much more of a factor for them. And then the second thing that popped up was that they had an additional constraint, which was that they had specific varieties often dictated to them by their wholesalers or processors. And so they were contractually obligated to grow this variety, and that was only available conventionally. And so, and I'll talk about a little bit later, that's something that we can think about in a policy context. One of the positive notes that we noticed between 2009 and 2014 was, well, first off, that in general, in terms of when we talked about quality issues, things like germination, seed-borne diseases, weed seed, and non-seed contamination, varietal off-types present in the seed lots, people felt like there wasn't really a difference in terms of whether they were getting it from, sourced from organic or conventional. And what we also saw was that from 2009 to 2014, people across the board for all those different quality concerns were less concerned about organic seed quality now than they were before. So in general, it seemed to be a trend that people were feeling more confident kind of in the professionalism of the organic seed industry and the varieties that they were receiving. So one of the things that we wanted to look at, and I'll point out that correlation, of course, is not causation, but an interesting little piece of this was one of the questions we asked was, certifiers can often play such an important role in the usage of organic seed in terms of are they certifiers just when they're going through with their inspection and meeting with the farmers, are they just saying, okay, did you look at 3 catalogs to find organic seed, kind of the bare minimum, or are they requesting additional steps? Are they asking that they look in more than that in terms of catalogs, or conduct variety trials, or if they're a big producer, they contract seed production or work with the seed company to do early ordering if seed volume is an issue, things like that. Are certifiers doing that. What we saw back in 2009 was that 61% of farmers said yes, their certifiers were asking them to do more than just look in 3 catalogs. In 2014, we see the reverse. Less than 40% of farmers said that certifiers are requesting them to do additional steps. So that it appears that certifiers have sort of backed off on requesting additional steps for organic seed. And one of the things that we've noticed was that, when you look at the farmers that responded that their certifiers did request more steps to source organic seed, across the board you see those farmers have reported that they increased their usage of organic seed over the last 3 years. And so this was one of the, potentially a very big role in the change in organic seed usage is the certifiers asking the farmers to look more. We asked farmers about their attitudes around genetically modified organisms, and they felt like two of the things that they felt was, first, they wanted the seed companies, if they're buying organic seed, they felt like the seed companies should be testing those lots and reporting the results to publicly. And they also felt that there should be that the current federal regulations are not adequate. This issue around seed company testing is a very sticky, tricky one, and I'll talk about it more on Friday, because right now, there is not an actual requirement the seed companies test, though most seed companies are testing when they're producing seed crops that are have the potential for GMO contamination. And it's a huge cost that they're bearing both in terms of all the testing and then in terms of all of the seed that ends up getting lost or redirected to the conventional side when it doesn't meet their testing. The flip side is there's a marketing opportunity there, and there's sort of a risk because a lot of farmers feel that that this should be mandated. This should be the way that things work, and I think not everyone realizes that it isn't the way that it works. It isn't actually required at this point, just because it says organic. We wanted to find out how interested farmers were in becoming more involved in the seed system. We had heard back from 1,350 farmers and wanted to hear kind of how much potential there was out there for more farmer involvement in seed production, in organic breeding. And what we saw was that a lot of farmers really felt that they wanted to get more involved in the seed system. More than half of the respondents, and I should have mentioned, I didn't say it this time, but when we first did this study back in 2009, one of the critiques of the study that we received after we put it out was that the responses that we heard back, these are going to be the people that are willing to spend 15 minutes to 45 minutes filling out a survey. They're going to be the people who are most passionate about organic seed, and that's not necessarily going to reflect organic agriculture as a whole. What we attempted to do this time is, in addition to this survey, we sent out the same survey, but to a random sample just drawn from the NOP list, and very aggressively sampled, kept on bugging those farmers until we got a very high response rate from that random sample group, so that we weren't just being as skewed by hearing back from friends of organic seed. And what we found is that pretty much across the board, the results were the same between the larger group and the smaller sample group. So we felt a little more confident that this wasn't just because we were talking to people who really liked organic seed. So with that being said, we heard more than half of people were interested in producing organic seed commercially, which is a pretty huge number. Over 90% were interested at least in finding out more and taking trainings to understand more about organic seed production. And then a quarter of the respondents said that they were interested in being involved in some way in plant breeding, regardless of whether or not there was necessarily a specific economic opportunity, whether or not there was funding for them coming their way, that they felt like they were interested in becoming more involved in the system that way. So that was really interesting to see. There's this large reservoir of passionate organic farmers that want to be more involved in this. So I'm going to switch over a little bit and talk specifically about plant breeding now. one of the things in the survey, farmers really felt that plant breeding, organic breeding was something that was important. They both, the majority agreed or strongly agreed with statements that, both that organic seed is important to the integrity of organic food production, but also that varieties bred for organic production are important to the overall success of organic agriculture. We asked them a question, a series of questions about kind of the positive side, like why do you buy organic seed? And we had kind of the control question because it's required as part of our certification, and then we had other questions. And the equal to kind of the control question, I think almost 80% of the respondents responded strongly or very strongly that they wanted to buy organic seed because they wanted their money to be going towards supporting more organic breeding. And so farmers saw these organic seed purchases as, one of the motivations for that is because they thought that would help fund development of varieties that are appropriate for them. So we asked farmers about what some of their priorities might be for organic breeding. The top 3 priority crops in the field crops: corn, soybeans, and wheat. Or I should really say crop categories here. And then in vegetables, it was tomatoes, brassicas, and squash. We asked them kind of broadly what traits were most important for them, which ones were critical, and which ones were lacking in the varieties that they had. With the field crops, the top priority traits tended to be yield and weed competitiveness. With the vegetable crops, it tended to be disease resistance broadly and quality. So I'm going to switch over for the last few slides here and talk, rather than about the producer survey, a little bit more about our survey or our research into public and private investments in organic seed and breeding research. So what we did here methods-wise is went through the USDA grant database, went through all of the state agencies that we knew of that had been doing funding for organic seed and research, looked at all of the kind of private foundations that had been funding it, and tried to see exactly how much funding was coming in and where that funding was going. So one of the nice things, we did this back in 2009, and one of the nice things we can see going from 2009 now through today was that there's been a significant, a very large, nearly double the funding coming in on an annual basis for organic seed and breeding research. So, this, just point out here, this tapers off here, and this is just because these later ones are projections because of the funding for multi-year. This is basically funding for multi-year projects that's already been committed. So if an OREI was a 4-year grant that got $2 million, rather than saying that they got their $2 million, this year, I split it up over 4 years. So that's why there's that tail there. It's not necessarily that things are going down. This is really, where we're at today. So when we look at the funding by topic, what we see is that the vast majority of that funding is coming in specifically for projects that have as their major component breeding and variety trials. Smaller amounts coming in for more seed production research, so agronomic research into how to produce seed, into policy and systems development and enterprise development research. Those are all much smaller pieces of the pie. And most of that funding, in turn, is coming from OREI here. This is the biggest chunk of money. Other federal funding, including things like the Risk Management Agency, like specialty crop block grants. You can see that SARE has continued to be an important part. One of the things that we see that we didn't see as much in 2009 that we do now is that we now have some relatively, these colors are obnoxious because it's hard to tell what's what, isn't it? But we have some, I believe that this here is from Ceres Trust, and this is from Cliff Bar. What we see is some relatively significant funding coming from some private foundations to support organic seed and breeding research, and that's new in this study. So again, that's just a little snapshot of the overall report. I will go into more detail on Friday, and then we're going to be publishing this coming up in the next month or so here. So you'll be able to see more details about all of this. But just as an overview, what are some of the snapshots that we saw? On the positive note, we see more farmers are using organic seed. In general, farmers seem to be more satisfied or less concerned with, have fewer concerns around organic seed quality. We see more investments going into organic breeding and seed research, including investments coming from the private foundations and industry. And ultimately, we see that there's a lot of interest and passion from organic farmers in terms of becoming more involved in the organic seed system, and also in terms of just seeing the importance of organic seed and breeding in the greater context of organic agriculture.
Okay. Any questions?
So the question was that Kathleen has to submit 3 pieces of evidence that she was unable to find organic seed as evidence for then sourcing conventional seed. That, in general, is sort of the standard. So some certifiers have been requesting more than that, because for a lot of farmers will use that kind of as a loophole, where they say, okay, well, I talked to these 3, they can look at 5 catalogs and pick the 3 that don't have the seed that they want and ignore the other ones, and say, okay, well, I made 3, I made 3 attempts. Here's, these 3 catalogs or these 3 emails to these companies that I already know don't have it, so I'm good to go. I can buy the conventional version of this stuff, even though it's, and not that everyone does that, but, some of the bigger picture things are just not knowing that something's actually equivalent because a variety trial was never performed. So saying, I just don't trust this. I don't know what that, I haven't heard of that variety before, that variety name. This is the one that I've always used. And so, when certifiers request that, farmers attempt to do a trial with some of the new things, then that often shifts people's mindsets as they become more comfortable with, okay, I saw it actually does look pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, I think everybody is ready for
Yeah, it's lunchtime.